probably D&D. Hantanil Tulian Meldanina, and thank you once again for joining me. My name is Aramil, and today we're going to be talking about war in a D&D sense. We are not going to be getting into the political ramifications of real-life war, because that's boring and painful and not what this channel is about. So, instead, war in a D&D sense is a very interesting thematic, because it really does combine a lot of medieval warfare. You have, ranks and units and line formation, and it combines a lot of modern warfare. You have artillery, basically. You have aerial combat, air superiority. All of these things are important and very valuable to think about in D&D. And honestly, it can be a little difficult to draw the line and also to reconcile massed infantry charges with the ability for things to cast fireball. I like to think of it as a very World War I and Civil War, those kinds of wars, where the technology has outpaced the tactics. So, honestly, it'd probably be very bloody, a very rough place to be a frontline combatant. But we're going to talk about all that today, and hopefully, maybe you'll learn something, maybe you'll get some ideas. Maybe I'll get some ideas, which is a good thing, because that's the next arc for my characters. So, yay. Now, one thing that I will be drawing on a lot is this wonderful book, Heroes of Battle. Now, this is the main go-to for land combat, just like massed infantry, cavalry, whatever, combat. Heroes of Battle. It's amazing. If you want to run a war campaign, get the book. If you want to run a war arc, at least find the PDF. Even if you are playing in 5th ed, this has some great stuff, alright? And, of course, like everything else, it can be adapted somehow. But a lot of the things don't require adaptation, and it can be really useful for those things. I'm going to quickly flip through here. So it talks about victory points, right, which is a very interesting idea. Basically, as the characters do things, they earn victory points. And these victory points add up to a better or worse, not situation, but tactical idea. So, like, if the characters... what it suggests. I'll try and organize my thoughts a little bit better. As everybody can figure out, I have no script, and I'm just going off the top of my head with a very rough idea. So it suggests having like 5 possible outcomes. And maybe one outcome where if the players just didn't exist, alright, they did nothing, and the war just raged. So there's a very bad outcome, a neutral outcome, a good outcome, and a very good outcome. And the more victory points the players get, the better the outcome. If they succeeded in a mission to destroy the enemy artillery, their catapults or whatever, that means that the Allied infantry can advance safer. Cool. If the characters went on to not only destroy the catapults, but actually captured the catapults and were able to turn them around at the enemy army, and held off the enemy forces trying to retake the catapults, until the friendly lines arrive and can just reinforce them. That's a very good outcome. So on and so forth. And it gives different things. Assist friendly troops, 1 victory point per 10 soldiers assisted, etc. Defeat enemy units. Encounter level of an enemy times 10 victory points. Whatever. You get the idea. There's a lot of there are a lot of ideas here. So, like, as a DM, I can just flip through these and think, what would make a fun adventure? Do I want them to disrupt enemy communications? It's right here. Maybe I want them to protect a defensive point, or seize a defensive point, provide intelligence. Maybe grab an offensive point. So that would be taking a point that is an advantageous point from which to attack. And it talks about, what defines a point. Is it a defensive point? Is it a maneuver point? Is it an intrinsic point, like a church or a holy site, etc.? You get the idea. It also brings in the idea of recognition points, which, honestly, knowing a lot of players, that's what the people are really about. People want to be recognized. And there are plenty of ways to get recognized. Capturing an enemy standard, recognition. Fighting in a famous battle, recognition. Planting the standard. Now that's a almost cliche, but so perfectly cliche that it's great. You get the idea. And after the end of what is it? After the end of a battle or a campaign or whatever. Well, not the campaign. Okay, yeah. After a battle, you take all the accumulated recognition points, and they are further split into 2 categories. All right. Half of them go to promotion points and half to decoration points. And then, so the decorations are like medals. You get medals, and that's cool. Or you might be promoted up from. It gives a very simplified military ranking: private corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, major, colonel, general. Which, yeah, it's simple, it's easy. And it also gives a bunch of, like, this roughly equates to this in this culture, so gives you a kind of idea. But you're expected to give your own rankings. Whatever. Or you could, one of your characters could say buck for a promotion, or what it's called bucking for a promotion or bucking for a decoration. In which case you don't split the reward recognition points, and instead, what is it, 3/4? Yeah. 3/4 of all of your recognition points goes to one of these categories, and the rest are wasted. Whatever, it's fine. If you're really trying to get a medal or a promotion quickly, that's how you do it. And this is really cool, and honestly, I encourage my players to check this out. Like I mentioned, we're about to go into a war arc, having completed the Gladiator arc, which went very nicely, I should say. I really enjoyed just kind of sitting back and watching the characters wail on each other. And a little bit of the trash talking beforehand was on point, and I loved it. We had a character, the 5th character, who just got ludicrously wealthy betting on the other characters. So, good job. Well, I shouldn't say ludicrously because they're 8th level, but he got several hundred gold pieces just kind of betting, and it's funny. I think he made the most cash of anyone. But I did. Now that I mean, I've told the characters ahead of time, like, hey, we're gonna do some war. And I'm not going to go into any specifics, obviously, because probably at least half of the party, give or take, will probably see at least part of this video. So I'm going to make sure not to include any spoilers. I will, of course, maybe next week or the week after, be talking about just, how it went on the first mission or so, and give some details about that. Ideas. Fun stuff, in other words. Now, one of the other things that this book does very well, or at least reasonably well, I'd say, is it talks about siege engines. Now, for this, it includes ballistas, mangonels, which are kind of the traditional catapult that we think of, trebuchets, and scorpions. Now, I should mention that I do like this. It has all of the siege engines in a nice, easy chart. It gives the cost of them, how much does the ammunition cost, how much does it weigh, the ranges, the damage, all the good shit. Okay? Gives rules for aerial bombardment, for volleys of arrows. Wonderful stuff. I'm a little bit disappointed in the variety of the siege engines, but this isn't this book's fault. It's kind of a larger D&D thing, because it seems that you have this gap. You have, handheld weapons, so what the characters are running around with, and then you have siege engines. Sorry, there we go. Which are huge and massive things, alright? And you don't really get a lot of it in between. I first thought about this in a pirate campaign I had, or that I actually had pretty quickly after playing Assassin's Creed Black Flag. If you've played that game, you might remember the chase guns, which are basically swivel-mounted heavy rifles, mini cannons. The point is that they occupy that middle space, alright? They're too big to just run around with, for the most part. But they aren't these massive things. So, to that end, I have devised rules for a polybolos. Now, a polybolos, I've talked about this before, but it's worth talking about again because I really think it's really cool. It's basically a repeating large crossbow, miniature ballista. Take your pick, really. But the idea is that, like normal repeating anything, the act of drawing back whatever firing mechanism loads the next piece of ammunition, which is kind of how a lot of repeating anything works. As far as I'm aware, I don't do guns much, but I'm pretty sure that's the idea. So the idea behind the polybolos, and I'm going to try this. Nope. Oh, here we go. Yeah, there we are. So, polybolos. I don't often give stats for things, but I figured that this would be a worthwhile exception. So, really, what it is a large-sized, heavy repeating crossbow. So, it is far too big for a normal human to just carry. But at the same time, it probably would only take 2 people, maybe 3, to operate effectively. And it pretty much just goes with the normal heavy repeating crossbow rules. So you got 5 shots in a clip. Each shot does 2d8 points of damage. I figure that if you have it mounted, which would be, it's on a stand, basically. So that would negate the majority of the penalties for using a large size category weapon. Good stuff. You could also probably find some rules for bracing a crossbow or other ranged weapon, and peruse that at your leisure and use as you would think. Whatever you think is probably the best. But using a profession siege engineer, I was thinking probably a DC 10 check. It probably works. And 2 full round actions to reload. So if you would imagine you had 3 siege engineers here messing with a polybolos. You have the gunner, for lack of better terms. You might have somebody who is a spotter, and somebody whose entire job it is to just reload. Every 5 turns or so, the spotter would help the reloader just to undo. One would take a full round action to undo a clip, the other would do a full round action to load the clip, and the gunner can just keep going. And honestly, I think that's probably pretty devastating in the idea that your average foot soldier is, at best, a level 1 fighter. So 2d8 points of damage in a constant barrage is pretty potent. So, now, let's see. One thing I didn't look at was cost, I'll be honest. A heavy repeating crossbow is already 400 gold. A light ballista is 500 gold. You would probably put this... I'd say that it's probably at maybe 450. Because being larger, that means the mechanisms can be larger, and it's just easier to make larger mechanisms. So it would be perhaps a little bit cheaper than a actual ballista, and probably a fair bit easier to use. And to be fair, you could have a single person doing all of this. That gunner could, every 5 turns, need to spend 2 turns to reload, and that's fine. Honestly, if you're just trying to make this a more... I hesitate to say self-sufficient. What's a good term? A more spread out force. You might have that. Let's see. Also, one fun idea, and I know that I've read about this before, but I could not find a good picture. I have definitely heard of polybolosi? Whatever. A polybolos being mounted on a wagon. And I think I saw something, but it was a very bad picture. So Google Images kind of failed me in that regard. Oh well. Now, but I feel like that would be very effective, especially in medieval warfare, but even in this fantasy D&D warfare, uh, mobility always helps. Is what it basically comes down to. You can rush to a position and basically provide maybe not artillery support, but some sort of heavy fire support is the rough idea. Now, your average wagon would probably only be big enough for maybe a gunner and one other person along with this polybolos. Um, but the idea remains. And if you... Let's see, I remember the... what was it? The Halfling War Wagon from the Arms and Equipment Guide, which was a 3.0 book. And it was kind of the first vehicle combat rules for the 3 point whatever system. And I'm pretty sure the Halfling War Wagon would be pretty devastating with a polybolos. Because if memory serves, it's basically a giant tortoise shell. So having a couple of those sticking out, or just one or two, would be pretty rough. That would be pretty difficult to deal with. Just fun ideas that you can think about and you can get the feel for. I mean, it's not overpowered because, of course, it's like a hefty chunk of cash. The players, if they get their hands on it, they're not taking it to the next dungeon. They're probably not taking it to the next encounter on the battlefield, honestly. Maybe they would use it if they're defending a point, but honestly, pretty quickly, player characters will outgrow a polybolos. I'm trying to think on how much damage my average character does, but it's at least 2d8. I know that one character really likes to still use a pretty basic longsword, but even still, there are enough enhancement bonuses on that he's regularly hitting for 10 damage at least, and he's the tank and like cleric, so his focus has not been on damage. So if that's the low hitter, that's the low end of the damage spectrum. So 2d8 isn't out of the question. It's not mind-boggling. And the idea that, you could have a couple, I hesitate to use trained peasants, because you do still require a profession siege engineer. So maybe a group of first level fighters, sure, why not? They could make good use of it. Have the spotter and the other guy, the ammo guy, also have, longbows. So they're just longbows, longswords, the works. So they're also defending that polybolos. And you've got a very effective emplacement, really. I would be hesitant to attack it as a first level schmuck. So, ideas are here. There are a lot of really fun ways that you can use just the war campaign in general. Now, it also goes on to talk about, well, it gives, of course, prestige classes, because this is a 3.5 book, so I hesitate to say this, but I'm going to say that at least 80% of all 3.5 books come out with at least one prestige class, and as often as not, a base class. It probably averages out to 1-to-1 at least. It talks about morale and how to rally a friendly unit. Good stuff. It brings in more spells, which are always fun. Magic items, weapons, and whatnot, including blast discs, in case you want, anti-infantry mines. Fun. And let's just check here. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, that Polybolos deals 2d8 throughout the lifetime of its clip. It may deal upwards of 10d8 points of damage. A blast disc does 5d6 points of damage to all creatures and objects within 10 feet of the disc once for 900 gold pieces. So, I'd say it's worthwhile investment. But that's just me. I tend to prefer damage over time rather than one-use items, but it's really whatever tool is best for a situation. Right? Magic siege engines also right in here, along with some very fun ammunition. So if you want to fire Alchemist's Fire from a catapult, here you go. And I gotta say, I really enjoy the Catapult Stone Adamantine. Though most weaponsmiths would decry this as an inexcusable waste of precious metal, there is no doubt as to the effectiveness of a huge chunk of adamantine thrown from a catapult. I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. It's just, let's see, 100 gold pieces a pound, at least. And the average catapult stone, where is that? Oh, we'll go with the trebuchet. So, the catapult, the stone from a light trebuchet is 100 pounds. You do the math. That is a very expensive knock screw you. Then again, it ignores hardness of 20, which is a lot. I can't think of many materials that have more than 20 hardness. Oh, and then you get some really cool illustrations about these magical ballistas, which I will try to show without too much glare. You get the idea. Just firing off fire and lightning, good shit. And of course, sample armies, very helpful. Split into squad, platoon, company, regiment, and brigade. And if memory serves, these do not line up with real life squad, platoon, company, regiment, brigade, which is kind of frustrating. But considering that I never fully learned, or at least memorized, the sizes of all these things anyways, it's not a huge deal to me. But if you're a military veteran or otherwise very interested in modern military, you might want to shift that around.